Today on Public Research.
A masked Israeli settler armed with a knife attacking the co-founder of the group Rabbis for Human Rights after Rabbi Ascherman tried to film Israeli settlers setting Palestinian olive trees on fire in the West Bank village of Awarta outside of Nablus.
One of the things I so often say to Palestinians is, I can't make pie-in-the-sky promises, given everything we're up against today, that what we're really going to be able to do for you, but I will promise one thing: you are not and will not be alone. And when I think, of course, just of all the times in our dark centuries for the Jewish people where we were alone, when the knock came on the door in the middle of the night, or the door was just busted down in the middle of the night, and how much we would have wanted people if just someone had been standing with us. And so I think that is something that is a commanding voice of Jewish history that we have to do.
Rabbi Arik Ascherman joins me to discuss the West Bank since October 7th, the Israeli far-right, Zionism, the Torah, and his career protecting Palestinians from settler extremists in the West Bank. Well, first I want to say it's an honor to have you here, and I've discussed you a lot on the podcast when talking about the West Bank, and I think the work you do is pretty heroic. For background, where did you grow up? How did you end up in Israel?
So I grew up in Erie, Pennsylvania, and from the youngest age, I was taught by my parents, rabbis and teachers, by my community. We didn't use the word tikkun olam back then, but that's in the sense that this idea that we have responsibilities in this world to be partners with God to make a better world. That was the way I was raised. And so I wanted to be a rabbi from about age 6, although hopefully what it means to be a rabbi has changed several times since then. And from bar mitzvah age, I certainly knew that was going to be connected to what we now call tikkun olam. I didn't necessarily know I was going to be here in Israel, but what happened was I thought I would live my life wherever I could make my greatest contribution to tikkun olam. And when I finished college, I thought I would go straight to rabbinical school, but God had some other ideas, and I actually was not accepted. They said, we want you to reapply, but you're not ready yet. You can't just go from school to school to school. And I'd heard about a program here in Israel called Interns for Peace, which was a community work program in the context of which I actually ended up living almost 2 years in an Israeli-Palestinian village in the Galilee and working to create better relations between the community of Tamra, where I was living, and the nearby Jewish community of Kiryat Ata. And that was precisely the kind of thing that at the rabbinical school, they hoped I would do something like that. They said, that's just what we like to see you do. But it was those 2 years that gave me a sense of community here with people doing similar kinds of work. And it was during those years that I came to the conclusion that this was the place where I could make my greatest contribution. After that, I did start rabbinical school, and it was always just thinking of how I prepare myself to come back. And that's kind of what happened. I guess the rest is history.
So you went to Harvard, right?
Yes.
Okay. So that was before you went to Israel for the first time, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
This is like in the 80s?
Yeah, I graduated Harvard in 81.
Okay.
I worked for Peace from 81 to 83. And then in 1983, I began my rabbinic studies, which I concluded in 1989. I had taken a year off in the middle, which is where I met my partner, Inat Ramon, who no longer had become Orthodox and doesn't call herself a rabbi anymore, but at the time was also starting to be a rabbi. And for many years, we were Israel's only rabbinic couple, rabbi couple. Uh, but and after we met, if I had any thought of living anywhere else, she would, as a third generation Israeli, would never agree to live anywhere else, and so that was kind of like um, icing on the cake, I guess you could say.
So I think I'm just going to skip to the present day, and I'm going to screen share something with you because I think it might be a good framing for our
Okay.
discussion. And this is a figure that I'm sure you know.
Uh-huh.
So this is Moshe Feiglin, who's a very far right Israeli
Hmm.
politician, and he
Correct.
was on BBC News. I'll just play this part. I'd like you to respond to it.
Can I ask you about the situation on the West Bank specifically? Again,
Of
I'm going to
course.
quote United Nations figures, which you may contest, but that's obviously for you to do if you choose to. But according to the United Nations Office for Humanitarian Affairs, and these are figures between the 7th of October and the 20th of February this year, there have been settler killings of 8 Palestinians, 111 injured, and the displacement of more than 1,200, including nearly 600 children. 561 incidents of Israeli settler attacks against Palestinians in that time. How,
You know, I hear those figures and I laugh. I really laugh.
so
It is
that's not happened.
it is so it's so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. Never happened. First of all, never happened. It was it is so ridiculous. You have here killers. It's like I don't know even where to start. I don't know where to start.
So there's no
Okay,
settler violence against Palestinians in the West Bank,
at
despite those figures from the United
at
Nations.
all, nothing, nothing. Look, if a raper catching a woman and she's screaming and yelling and she's biting his finger, okay, and then you say she was violent. This is what you do right now.
What's your reaction?
Well, they're the liars. Um, and it all started with some police statistics which were about false reports. They made the claim that we call in false reports and that all these things are just never really happened. Um, you know, uh, sometimes it happens because uh, we call the police and by the time the police has come, the incident's over. Or I've had other cases where we caught the emergency number and they say the police arrived and didn't see anything, but we were there and they never arrived. Um, there's all kinds of uh, ways that they get to these just untrue statistics. And it serves a purpose for people that want to say that we are the troublemakers and creating, a false images. But I mean, I could send you, and you can see it yourself, and we can certainly send you just countless videos of settler violence. And some people, you also have people say that there's no hunger in Gaza, and you have people that say uh, all kinds of things to defend the indefensible. And of course, the analogy that Feigl gives at the end is so inappropriate because, of course, there was a terrible, barbaric attack by Hamas on October 7th, 2023. Uh, but that's not the people here in the West Bank. And what's happened in the West Bank is that the settlers have exploited the fact that, the best analogy I can give is that West Bank Palestinians are analogous to Japanese Americans after Pearl Harbor. And of course, after Pearl Harbor, when the United States put Japanese Americans in camps, um, nobody was willing to, or almost nobody was willing to stand up for them. It was only more than 40 years later that the United States government apologized and began to compensate and say that what we did was a combination of racial prejudice, wartime hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. Analogies only go so far, but I think that's certainly very apt in describing our current reality. And so exploited the fact that so many Israelis who were, at least in theory, supportive of Palestinian human rights, although many of them weren't really active as we would have liked them to have been. But those people just aren't there anymore. They're just the it's impossible to overestimate the level of trauma that October 7th caused for Israelis, and the pain, the anger, the fear. And as a result of all that, um, they're just not interested in what's what I was trying to say was that the settlers have exploited the fear and trauma and pain and anger that Israelis across the political spectrum are feeling, which has led to even many progressive Israelis just not interested right now in what's happening with Palestinians or Palestinian human rights. And that has allowed them to fast forward plans made way before the war, had nothing to do with the war. Their intended plans to dispossess and expel Palestinians from their homes. And this idea that West Bank settlers are the raped woman is simply uh, a total twisting of reality, when in fact they are totally the aggressors here. You just look at the maps from 1967 on, and you can see how Palestinians have less and less uh, space for them, and the spheres of control of the settlements has just
Have you
increased.
have you ever met Moshe Feiglin?
Yeah, I've even debated him, or
Wow.
well, it wasn't really. I mean, we had some kind of or we were on some kind of panel together. Um, this was many, many years ago, before he was a member of Knesset or anything else. Um, he, what I remember was his total self-assured arrogance, um, and kind of disdain for anybody who thought different than him. But uh, he is simply um, I know, a fanatic.
I think can we to sort of illustrate what you do. I have a map. I think it's the geography is really important, especially for Americans who don't know it
Mhm.
that well. So I'm gonna put up this map. You can see that, right?
Yes.
Okay. So today, I'm just curious. What if you don't mind discussing it, but where were you?
Well, where I am right now, I'm in the West Bank right now.
Yeah.
I'm sleeping over here in an endangered village, north of Jerusalem, just a
Okay.
bit north of Jerusalem. And basically, uh, depending on how you count, somewhere between 25 and 57 shepherding communities are just gone. They don't exist. Some of them before October 7th, most of them after. Um, Many of them simply fled state-backed settler violence, and in some cases, they were people were literally expelled at gunpoint. um, by settler soldiers, because those lines are blurred when the settler security units details have been given uniforms and guns and said, now you're in reserve duty. And so a lot of what we do today is what we call protective presence, simply being present in communities that are in the gun sites and haven't fled yet, like the place I am right now, Moyo Deer. And there are kind of different organizations have taken responsibility for different areas. Um, there are people that work in Masafa Yatta, the South Hebron Hills, um, just south of Hebron. Um, there are people who are in the northern Jordan Valley, another group in the southern Jordan Valley, and we are working along what's called the Alone Road, which is above the Jordan Valley, west and above the Jordan Valley. Right now, I'm about 15, 20 minutes north of Jerusalem. Muraya El Dio. I don't know if it would be on your map or not. Mukhmas. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, I mean the geography is so important. So, do you mind talking about what happened today?
Well, in one sense, Mukhmas and Muraya El Dio are success stories as opposed to some of the other communities where we were even doing 24/7 presence and are sadly still eventually fled their homes or expelled from their homes. These are communities which in the past we felt like we needed to be there 24/7 and have been able to scale back a bit because things seem to have improved a bit and calmed down for these communities. However, um, in recent weeks, maybe as results of the U.S. elections, the settler intrusions and harassments have been ramping up again. Um, they are not as bad as in other places, but we are now really facing the fact that we need to again, we and whether it'll be 24/7 or how we're going to do it. And we're doing it with a serious, unfortunately, right now. And so we have a real challenge. We are going to do this, but we need to do it because these communities are again feeling the pressure that could lead to them fleeing. Although I'll also say that in some of the other regions that other organizations are dealing with, things are even more violent than they are right now in the area that we're responsible for. But it's just everywhere. We're right now we're in the middle of Hanukkah and we're the festival of light, but we're really descending into darkness with almost every king we could possibly turn to try to work for basic protections for Palestinians simply aren't there right now.
So what is usually what happens? So these Palestinians are shepherding their goats or sheep, whatever, and then what happens? What do the settlers try to do?
So it can be anything from trying to steal sheep, just take the flock and make off with it. It can be trying to block Palestinians, shepherds from getting to grazing lands at all or to water sources. Where we are now, it's in one sense it's more low key. Like this evening, basically the settlers were walking through the village And one could argue and say that they really didn't do anything. But they don't need to do anything to strike fear, because they've done so much over the years, and people here know what they're capable of, that just their presence demonstrating that they can go anywhere they want and no one can stop them is a very, as you can imagine, unsettling and
It's intimidating.
yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask, when I visit Israel, I mean, it's darkly funny, but one of the things that struck me is sort of, it's not funny, but it's sort of ironic, is the settlers, who a lot of people would say are sort of the most far right people in Israel, right? They look like they're like Fish like they're fans of the Grateful Dead, like you know what I mean? Like they have some of them have the long hair. Why is that?
Well, it's a culture that's developed. It's a reflection, maybe, of the fact that their lack of respect for any kinds of societal norms. Partly, I think it's a desire to be a throwback to biblical times, and figuring that this is their image of, and I mean, of course, traditional Jews often have, can have a long beard and the side locks, but usually not wearing the rest of their hair long. But it's, I don't know, it's like intentionally or intentionally making them into like half beast. I don't know, wild people.
Yeah, it's just strange that if you brought them to America, people would be like, these are like some far left Green
Right,
Party members or something.
right. Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's true. It's
yeah.
true.
Um, so you've been stabbed, right, by these guys?
Well, I was attacked by a knife-wielding settler.
Video has gone viral of a masked Israeli settler armed with a knife attacking the co-founder of the group Rabbis for Human Rights, Rabbi Arik Ascherman. The incident took place after Rabbi Ascherman tried to film Israeli settlers setting Palestinian olive trees on fire in the West Bank village of Awarta outside of Nablus. The video shows the masked man grabbing a knife out of his back pocket, then repeatedly lunging at the 55-year-old rabbi who is attempting to retreat. The masked man also kicked and punched the rabbi while making threatening gestures with the knife. The settler eventually ran away. Rabbi Arik Ascherman joins us now from Jerusalem.
Who brought down the knife 3 times and stopped each time. He could have easily have murdered me, but chose not to. So I wasn't actually stabbed, but it was close enough.
You've been attacked. You've put your body on the line for years. So this has been going on for, at this point, decades. I assume that they have some kind of strategy. So, like, is it something where you could say, like from 2005 to 2010, the settlers, they really focused on getting the olive farmers out of this area around Hebron. And then their focus shifted to doing stuff around Ramallah. Is it that strategic?
It's absolutely strategic. So if we want to look at things historically, back in 1967, just before enduring the Six-Day War, we revisionist historians may beg to differ, but many Israelis felt under existential threat, and that this could be the end of the state. My partner remembers being a young girl and huddled in a bomb shelter, and hadn't seen her father, who'd been off fighting for a long time. And when not only did we not get destroyed, but we won what seemed to be a miraculous victory. Uh, this was seen as God's hand in history by many religious people. We talk about the founding of the state as Rishit Smichat Gulatenu, the beginning of the founding of our redemption. And now God had delivered basically the entire biblical land of Israel into our hands. And this unleashed powerful messianic forces, people who felt that it would be sinful, now that God had returned all this land to our hands, to give it up and not to redeem it, to populate it, uh, and in the eyes of many, maybe just to expel the other inhabitants, the non-Jewish inhabitants. Um, and I mean, when right after '67, before the settlement movement started, the main debate was between those who said our security would be best served by territorial depth and those who said land for peace. Um, but uh, I mean, at that time, of course, there was the Khartoum Conference of the Arab world saying no um, peace, no recognition, no negotiation. So those who supported land for peace really didn't have much to go with. Um, and then into that vacuum did come the settlement movement. Uh, and the focus initially was seeing where they could build settlements and where they could declare land to be state land and land that didn't belong to Palestinians. And uh, if there is one documentary that I can recommend, it's The Law in These Parts, which is a documentary which uh, people who were the architects of the occupation telling in their own words what they did and why. Uh, and there's a whole section where they come up with using Turkish laws of what was called a dead land, um, land that was beyond where you could hear the rooster crow, and if it wasn't worked, you could say it now belonged to the state, and all kinds of techniques like that to take what was Palestinian land and declare it state land. And that was maybe a next stage. And then the building of the settlements. Uh, and then we went through a stage where I would say the fastest pace of the takeover of Palestinian land was through agriculture. What you did was you used Palestinians. We used our guns and force to prevent Palestinians from working their lands. And then again, you went to old Turkish laws, which said that if you're not working your land for a certain amount of time, it reverts to the state. Or if others work it, if now the settlers now start working the land, they could say it was theirs, or at least their right to use. And that was a way of basically taking over huge swaths of Palestinian land. And then in February of 2021, uh, there was a conference of Amana, a large settler organization, one that thankfully is increasingly being sanctioned, first by Canada and then by other countries. I think the United States as well now. And Zephyr, who leads Amana, he's a longtime settler ideologue and strategist and a convicted terrorist. He was convicted by an Israeli court for his role in the Jewish underground. And he said at this conference, today, we've now created 30 so-called shepherding outposts and are planning on creating more. The difference between a settlement and an outpost is, although if you accept that the fact that the Fourth Geneva Convention applies in the West Bank in terms of laws of occupation, by definition, all Jewish communities that have been created over the 6-7 border, the borders recognized by the international community and created by the United Nations as being the borders of the state of Israel, those are all illegal. However, an outpost is also illegal according to Israel. In other words, the settlements are seen as legal by Israel, although most of the world doesn't recognize that. Outposts are also were never authorized by Israel either, and so he said that the most effective way of taking over and holding on to Palestinian land is through the shepherding outposts. And it's also very cost effective. You just need a couple of sheep and a couple of tents and a couple of settlers. And the sheep have to range far and wide to graze. And with the backing often of the Israeli security forces, they protect the right of the Israelis, the settlers, to graze, which denies access to Palestinians to their traditional grazing lands. And then often, or all too often, these Palestinian shepherds can just give up being shepherds, leaving the land, selling their flocks, going to live in an urban area, because if you're a shepherd, you're living on the edge to begin with a very difficult balance between feeding your flocks through grazing versus bought fodder. And when you have to buy more and more food for your sheep, it becomes shepherding becomes less and less economically viable. And so all these factors have both the aggressiveness out of a commitment to dispossessing Palestinians that really characterizes these outposts. And now, of course, there's way more than 30, combined with the 1-2 punch of settler violence and intimidation and the economics of it. And then on top of that, other ways in which the state backs these settlers. All these have become the strategy for expulsion and dispossession.
I'm going to share this map of the West Bank. It might be out of date. So what area have the settlers in the West Bank, have they sort of conquered the most in the last 20 years?
So, two areas that they are most focusing on are the South Urban Hills and the area east of the Lone Road going down into the Jordan Valley.
As a rabbi, I'm very curious about this. I saw something, and I believe in Zionism. I believe it's important for the Jewish people. And I'm going to play a clip of a rabbi you might know named Avi Abelo, I think his name is.
Today's borders of the Third Jewish Commonwealth, the modern Jewish state of Israel, is not the borders God told us. The borders that, when you actually look at the Torah, is down towards Egypt with the Sinai and up north up to the Hiddekel River, which includes Syria, Iraq, Jordan, etc. We are living through times realizing the expansion of the borders of the Jewish state of Israel according to where HaKadosh Baruch Hu told us one day we will be. God told us that. I know one day we're supposed to have these big borders. This is what's supposed to be. We are the Jewish people. We are supposed to follow God's ways. We are supposed to be connected to God. We are supposed to be living in our ancestral homeland and maximizing and achieving the actual borders that God...
So just to be clear for the audience, the borders he's referring to would include half of Iraq, right?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and this is something Moshe Feiglin also believes. And it's just sort of infuriating to see these maniacs say, a safe haven for Jews, forget that. Let's risk it all for my crazy fundamentalist vision. It's sort of infuriating. What is your reaction to that?
Well, I will say that that was extreme even for the extremists. Um, Many of them say all we want. I mean, what's generally accepted as the biblical land of Israel, it does not. I mean, it includes the West Bank, um, but it doesn't include all of Syria and half of Iraq and all this kind of thing. Uh, and even many of the settlers who are committed to expelling um, Palestinians from or expanding our control over the entire biblical land of Israel would say, but outside that, uh, we don't care what happens as
Right,
long as we're
right, right.
secure. Uh, and you know, uh, I mean that's bad enough, but where's what we heard in that clip was just almost off the wall.
Yeah, but what is your when? Because I'm sure that you've had debates, arguments with these types of settlers, and when they try to justify what they're doing based on the Torah and whatnot, what how do you react to that?
Well, obviously, not everybody in the world has to accept the Bible an authority. For me, it is, and you cannot read the Bible seriously without seeing that it does say, in a sense, what that rabbi was saying, that God grants the land of Israel to the Jewish people in perpetuity. We don't believe that as some Christians would say, that the covenant was ever um, broken or canceled. And so from that sense, uh, one can ask, how can I, as a religious Jew who accepts uh, the Torah and what have you, how can I disagree? Many people ask me that. Well, first of all, if you take the Torah and the Bible seriously, uh, in the same way that you cannot escape the idea that God has promised the land of Israel to the Jewish people in perpetuity, is the fact that you see very clearly, certainly in the book of Deuteronomy and in the prophets, that the amount of that land that we will um, be in control of at any point in history is going to expand or contract according to our moral behavior. Of course, we could have then a debate, and there would be huge disagreements about what is moral behavior, what is God's will. Uh, this, there are many who would say that when God delivered again the entire biblical land of Israel more or less into our hands in 1967, it would be sinful not to redeem it, to take it over, to settle it by almost any means possible. And there are those of us who would say that when we read in the very first chapter of the Torah, in chapter 1, verse 27 of Genesis, that human beings are created in God's image, it doesn't say just the Jews, doesn't say just the wealthy. It makes a point of saying men and women, and that the true violation of what God would want for us as human beings is when we don't honor that image of God in every human being. And if one believes that it is not God's will that we oppress and harm other human beings, then you might even have a paradox that the very actions that are necessary to hold on to all of this land are the very ones which in God's eyes would make us unworthy of doing so. Um, and so that's part of the way I look at it. Another way, the late Rabbi Ovadia, the founder and spiritual mentor of the Shas ultra Orthodox Sephardic Shas party, um, in a religious response that many of his supporters would rather forget, is he said that as holy as the land of Israel is, human life is more holy. And therefore, he said, if bloodshed can be prevented through the ceding of territory, as painful as that may be, it's a no-brainer because human life trumps. Uh, again, then you can have the debate. There are those who will say that we don't prevent bloodshed by territorial compromise, but if you do believe that through some form of territorial compromise, human life can be saved, then according to Rabbi Avadia Yosef, what we have to do is clear. I wish that I could say categorically that the way I understand the Jewish tradition is the only way of understanding it, and everybody else is wrong. I can't say that. Um, Shivim Panim the Torah, there are at least 70 different ways of looking at every word in Torah.
Right.
But there are many, many rabbis and sages throughout entire history who have recognized the rights of non-Jews, including in the land of Israel. And I'll say one other thing. One of the things that I learned from my parents and back in kindergarten or whatever is that gifts are to be shared. The idea, I don't accept the idea that although I do accept the idea that God promised the land of Israel to the Jewish people. Uh, I don't accept the idea that because God promised to us, that means uh, we have to have sole control over the land, and it can't be shared in any way. It's not the world I want to be a part of.
I think your points are very robust. I come at it, from a more of a secular Jewish perspective. And my question for these, if I could ask Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and these people a question, I would tell them my nightmare is really that what's going to happen is that it will be that these sort of left-wing, a lot of them secular, pragmatist Jews created the modern state of Israel, and that all the work that they put in to getting this safe haven for Jews in danger is going to be destroyed by their opposite, far-right, fundamentalist, chauvinist, messianic people. It's sort of a nightmare. Do you sort of fear that these people really endanger the entire state?
Of course, I fear
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And many people that say, even Rabbi Abraham Kook, who was seen as a paragon of acceptance of secular Jews and everything. So many argue that basically what he actually was saying is that um, we can exploit them for for our ultimate purpose. Not everybody would say that that's what he said, but many do say that. And in that sense, one could say that from the very get-go, even when the religious Jewish parties and whatever seem to be so much more moderate than they are today, that that was always a um, temporary thing. In fact, it was I think it was the Rabbi Herzog who was kind of asked to give a religious backing and justification for democracy. Uh, Basically, he does rule that non-Jewish Israelis should be given the vote, for example, but the justification for it um, is that the world um, that that the world has too much power over us, and therefore we have to do these things. The implication being that if there will be a time when our standing vis-a-vis the rest of the world is better, then we wouldn't necessarily have to give non-Jews the vote. Uh, but in my mind, that's a desecration of God's name. It is finding ways of, again, circumventing what I believe is one of our first and foremost religious obligations, which is creating a world which does honor the image of God in every single human being. And in fact, that's why I see the settlement movement in many ways as avodah zarah, idolatry. We've made an idol out of the land of Israel. Uh, Rabbi Heschel, Abraham Joshua Heschel, used to talk about the fact um, that what is most holy in Judaism is not real estate or buildings. And one of the things I've learned in my life is that the things that are most dangerous, with the most potential for becoming idolatry, are good things. I am moved sometimes to tears by a national anthem or a flag. And because those things can so move me emotionally, I know how dangerous they can be. And so, for example, it's the custom in many US and Canadian synagogues that on one side of the Aron HaKodesh, the Ark with the Torah scrolls, you have an Israeli flag, and on the other side, a US or Canadian flag. I always said no flags in our sanctuaries. Here we worship God, not flags. And it's not because everything that a flag represents is necessarily bad, but its potential, because of the emotional hold that it can have on us, to leading us to bad things, is very, very great. And again, you cannot read the Bible seriously without understanding that the land is holy. It's almost like a living entity. It feels pain when evil is done upon it. It can itself spit people out, the Torah says, um, when they are acting in ways which is painful to the land itself.
It's very
But
powerful. Yeah.
as holy as the land is, it is not created in the image of God as the human being is. And when that holiness of the land blinds us, it's simply so that we cannot see or perceive the image of God in a fellow human being. That leads to idolatry because we put the land above the human being. And and when I talk about putting the land in front of the human being, I'm not just talking about Jewish human beings. I'm talking about those Palestinian shepherds and farmers or whoever else. Uh, and 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 that's why I do see, uh, as much as I believe that God promised us the land of Israel, as much as uh, as I believe in the holiness of the land of Israel, uh, I think that what we're doing with putting the land of Israel above basically any other value is idolatry.
It's powerful, powerful words. Related to this, I wanted to show you something. I find this disturbing as a Jew. I've seen a lot of this.
Oh God, to everyone that agrees that Hillel Huld is a Shanda to the Jews. Um, what an incredible shot. Talk about turning darkness into light. Okay, I'm missing the context
Well,
here.
it's an AI image, and I guess the joke, quote unquote, is that the destruction of this structure in Gaza is now in the shape of a Hanukkah, and then the explosions are the candles. So he's basically making light of the sort of destruction in Gaza.
Uh-huh.
And I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot of that over the course of the war. I've seen, you know, Channel 14 in Israel, right?
Of course, yeah.
Magal, I think that's his name.
Mhm.
He'll post videos of the destruction in Gaza, and he'll be like, it's a wonderful sight. I'm not sure if you've seen stuff like that, but what is your reaction to see some Jews, and this is a minority, thankfully, but sort of glorying in the destruction in Gaza?
My first reaction is he's showing what most of Israeli media is refusing to show. I mean, he's obviously putting that very awful spin on it. But one of our, for most Israelis do not see what you can see on your television screens all the time. I mean, obviously Israelis could surf the net, uh, and from what you're saying, I hadn't realized that it you could see some of it on Channel 14. But I mean, even the most liberal of the mainstream Jewish Israeli newspapers here, Haaretz, for many, many months into the war, was not showing or talking or writing about any of that. And uh, obviously, I think it's simply uh, abominable that anybody could find that a cause for celebration. In fact, even most people that I know that support the mass destruction we've wrought on Gaza, many of them certainly see it as a necessary evil, but recognize the, the tragedy of all the civilians who have lost their lives. Uh, so the fact that he would see this as something to be celebrated is simply, again, just another Chilul Hashem, just a desecration of God's name.
So this is some footage from Gaza. I bet you haven't seen this. I saw this recently, and it just sort of shocked me. So I just want to. It's hard to believe. It looks like something from a movie.
Mm-hmm.
What do you make of that imagery?
Oh, it's just so painful to watch. Now, listen, having fought the evils of the occupation for my entire career, basically, uh, none of the evils of the occupation
Mm-hmm.
justify the barbaric Hamas attack on October
Right.
7th.
Right.
Um, and I absolutely believe that we have the right to defend ourselves.
Right.
Uh, and many in Israel would say, as regrettable as it is, all those things were necessary in the name of our self-defense. And there are real dilemmas because people that live, Israelis that live in the Gaza border want to know that at the end of this war, they can live in their homes safely and not feel that in another year or two there's going to be another round. They are continuing to be unsafe, and I get that. I
Right.
I understand that. Um, so the question then becomes, uh, well, there's a couple of things. First of all, are there red lines to legitimate self-defense? Are there things that you say we as Jews or we as human beings don't do, even if we do think that they contribute to our self-defense? So in the Talmud, in Sanhedrin, we hear the statement that every Jewish school child we're taught if someone comes to kill you, get
Rise
up
and kill
earlier and you
first.
kill them first.
Yep.
And if you ask people how the tractate continues, you'll get silent. We're taught about the fact that if you see somebody pursuing somebody else to murder them, you are not only permitted, you are obligated to murder the potential murderer, or not murder, kill the potential murderer. However, if you could stop that person by any other means and you kill them, you are a murderer. Then we get to a standard that how I don't know how many people can actually live by. Uh, what a person comes to Rabbah, the same Talmudic rabbis that a few pages earlier said if someone's going to kill you, you get up earlier and kill them first. But now the question is, man in my village is going to be, he says, if I have to go and this innocent person, what should I do? Rabbah would have had no problem had the question been, can I defend myself against the person coming to murder me? But regarding killing an innocent third person, uh, he says, let yourself be killed rather than killed. Who's to say that your blood is redder than his? Um, and again, how many people can actually would be willing to risk their own lives not to harm somebody else? Um, but that's the standard the Talmud is creating for us, and so the question really becomes, um, uh, even in the name of our self-defense, is it permissible to kill thousands of children? And you know what? if I believed that by doing so, we could, in fact, achieve the peace and security that we absolutely deserve, maybe at some point I would feel challenged. But the fact is, and this is what makes it all the more tragic, is that it won't. You know, our sages taught the sword comes into the world because of justice delayed and justice denied and the improper teaching of Torah. And it's not that they were in favor of the sword. And I know how thin and dangerous is the red line between explanation and justification. And again, there's no justification for the Hamas attack or any of that. But in terms of explanation, there are the hardcore Hamas folks who, even if there were to be a just peace tomorrow, would still be committed to our destruction. But what drives so many Palestinians into their hands is the injustice that we're perpetrating against Palestinians. And the fact is, yes, there are some historical examples where through just overwhelming force, resistance has been crushed. Generally, that's not what happens. And in my opinion, were we to kill every single Hamas member, as long as our oppression of Palestinians continues, you can kill people, but not an idea, and that there's going to be something new, maybe even worse than Hamas. In other words, even if you don't care a fig about Palestinians or human rights, or you only care about Jews or whatever, even from that narrow point of self-interest, this is not going to bring us the peace and security that we want.
And the world will turn against you.
There's that possibility as well.
Yeah.
And it's like there's another image in the Talmud in Tanit that someone is ritually impure because they've touched a dead lizard. And they go to the mikvah, the ritual bath, to purify themselves, but they can't because they're still holding onto the lizard. And until they let go of the lizard, which is the occupation and our oppression of Palestinians, you can't purify yourself. We're not going to have peace and security.
So I've asked, I remember after October 7th, many Israelis were talking about, we can never do a two-state solution, and they would point to these polling results from the West Bank. They'd say, look at how popular Hamas is in the West Bank, and it would be in the 70s or 8, I forget. And I would ask them on my podcast, I would say, well, put yourself in the shoes of like an 18-year-old in the West Bank. When they look at a boss, Fatah, right? They see this feckless clown who from their point of view, allows the Israelis, the settlers, to move deeper and deeper into what is supposed to be their future state, right? And it makes them look to Hamas as, oh, those guys, they take action. They have integrity. And so I would say, well, if you want them to, the numbers of support for Hamas to go down, why don't you treat Abbas better? Why don't you stop the settlers from expanding? And some got it. I don't know if you know Daniel Seidemann.
Yeah.
He got it. But I've had other guests who they just don't get it at all, and they just say, "Oh no, that's not a core issue. That doesn't really matter." They would still hate us with or without the settlements. What are your thoughts on that?
I think without a doubt that what has led to the subterranean support, the less than zero support for the Palestinian Authority, is a perception that it's totally corrupt, and B, that the strategy of negotiating with Israel, has brought them nothing. So I think there is a lot of truth to what you were saying before, um, and and the other thing is that there have been countless studies over the years that have shown that there's the same majority of both Israelis and Palestinians who want a compromise, negotiated solution, but even a larger percentage on both sides that say we want peace, but the other side doesn't. And when you don't believe it's possible, you do the sour grapes thing. I didn't really want it. And a week before Sadat came to Jerusalem, opinion polls were dead set against what people were overwhelmingly in favor of a week after, because an Egyptian president coming and speaking to the Israeli people from the Knesset in Jerusalem said to people, it's possible. And when they allowed themselves to believe that it was possible, they also allowed themselves to understand it. That's what they really wanted.
There's this head in the sand quality to not to be offensive to them, but to a lot of the Israelis who are very smart that I talk to, where I'll bring up the settlement expansion as something that potentially radicalizes West Bank Palestinian attitudes. And they just shrug it off. Like, no, that's just, like it's a red herring.
That's simply ridiculous. These things are very real. And it's, it's just a way of avoiding responsibility for the situation we've created, which ultimately is to our detriment as well as to the detriment of Palestinians. And I do think that we don't need another peace plan. We've got plenty of those. We need a binational psychiatrist, given that we have all these psychological games that we play to not believe that what we actually want is possible, and convince ourselves of that. I also wish that there would be somebody or something out there that could make a Sadat-like move. One of my fantasies for years is if the foreign ministers of the Arab League would just announce, we're coming to Jerusalem next week, we're not going to take no for an answer, it's time to end this. And in fact, when you do look at Israeli opinion polls, as along with the feeling by so many Israelis post October 7th that that Palestinians cannot be trusted, that they're all Hamas or Amalek or whatever. It seems that there's even a majority of Israelis who would be prepared to take significant steps for a deal which would, bring in Saudi Arabia and these kinds of things, so that that's there's also, from that point of view, even some cause for tentative optimism.
Let's discuss what comes next, because it's a little bit scary with Trump coming in with figures like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir in power. Do you know Hussein Ibish by any chance?
I'm not sure that I do.
He's at the Arab Gulf States Institute. I interviewed him on my last episode. Here's what he is worried is going to happen in the West Bank. I want to get your take on it.
The army, in a completely pointless way, to attack these armed youth gangs in Jenin and Tulkarm and other cities in the West Bank. They've been doing their best to make life miserable for Palestinians and to provoke a fight. They want an eruption of violence in the West Bank, which they will use either to conduct the annexation and ethnic cleansing that they want to do, or to get Israelis more ready for the day when it comes. Because it will come, the day will come, and it will undoubtedly be on the grounds of national security, and it will be done. It was the last thing we ever wanted to do. We cried and we didn't want to do it, but someone has to be the grown up here. We had to do it. We had to draw a line, us over here and them over there, and it's the only way. In fact, it's good for them. We did them a favor, and if more of them ended up or somehow got over the other side of the line, all for the better. It's good for them. It's good for us. We had to be the grown-ups. We had to bite the bullet. This was very painful. That's what they'll say, right? And I think at a minimum, they want to prepare Israelis for that day, because most Israelis are not aware that that's virtually inevitable. I think most Israelis are not.
So what is your take on that?
It was a little bit hard for me to follow what his point was.
Basically, he thinks that they want to stir up maybe some kind of October 7th type action in the West Bank, and then it will be able to justify things they've wanted to do for a long time in the West Bank.
They don't even have to stir anything up. They're doing it right now. I mean, look at depending on how you count, between 25 and 57 shepherding communities that are just gone. And they don't have to have another incident to do that. It's enough to exploit what we said, at the beginning, when I explained that, that Palestinians are like Japanese Americans after Pearl Harbor. There's already just like more or less a free reign almost to Palestinians, to settlers to do just about anything now, because of the fact that so many people just aren't with us right now.
Have you ever met Smotrich or Ben-Gvir?
Smotrich, no. Ben-Gvir, way too many times.
Really?
I mean, from many, many years when he spat on my car to olive harvest, and when I was being interviewed by somebody in the Hebron area, and he just came up and was shouting, saying I'm exercising my right of free speech. He represented that young man who attacked me with a knife. I mean, obviously everybody has a right to legal representation, so that in itself wasn't wrong. But I've had over the years more contact with him than I'd.
Have you had a conversation with him?
Of sorts, not really. Passing a couple of sentence or two, nothing that can give me so much insight. Beyond what we all know.
So he was the lawyer for the guy who attacked you. And what happened to the guy who attacked you?
He got a very light sentence. Actually, many of my friends were upset with me because at the sentencing hearing, I also argued that I didn't necessarily want to see him in jail. If you look at Durkheim's theories of, the purpose of law, my interest was not for revenge. It was to some degree, of course, to protect society. But I would have loved to see a process by which he would go through rehabilitation. And in fact, but he was given a very light sentence, slap on the wrist. The prosecution appealed, and he was given a stronger suspended sentence. He had to pay something which I never even cashed. Um, he so that's what he had to do.
I don't understand their vision. But let me put it this way. If Donald Trump called up Smotrich and said, "Hey, I love what you're all about. When I become president, just do whatever you want. You got carte blanche." What would they do?
Um, I don't know. I think it is very possible that the United States could greenlight annexation of the entire West Bank. And then it's also a question not only what Israelis would do, but what the rest of the world international community would do. Would I also have heard I've just come back from that part of the world that people are running scared of Trump. There, uh, there are people in the UK, for example, who actually believe that Trump could decide to sanction England for not going according to his plan. I don't know.
Under their vision, because Smotrich has his decisive plan, they annex the West Bank, and then they don't give the right to vote to the Palestinians.
They always leave that very vague. What would be the fate of Palestinians that would now be part of the Jewish state, so to speak? And would they be like dhimmi, like just um, openly second or third or fourth class citizens? Would they try to find something different? I don't know.
Um, I want to shift to a question, which is about the left. I believe you call yourself some kind of Zionist, not maybe not the people's typical definition, but you definitely, you want the hostages back. You didn't celebrate October 7th. I wonder, has it been awkward for you, because you're someone who I guess you would say a lot of Israel critical people like and engage with, but a lot of those people, for many reasons, partially the death of the peace process and other things, have become very anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, and extreme. Like I'll see all the time on social media people saying Israel's the new Nazi Germany, Zionists are the new Nazis, stuff like that. I wonder, have you had a situation where these people, I don't know, they invite you for a talk, you give your talk, and then maybe you say, I consider myself a Zionist, and then they're like, they gasp, or has there been friction on that?
Sometimes I ultimately I think it comes down not to what you say or even what you believe, but what you do. And it's certainly become commonplace to almost make the assumption that those of us who oppose all kinds of policies are anti-Zionist, when those things don't have to necessarily go together. I kind of think that Zionism is like a cosmic boogeyman. It's like so much depends on whether you say you're a Zionist or you're not a Zionist or an anti-Zionist. And of course, you have to unpack that and say, what do you mean when you use the word Zionist? I never considered myself a Zionist, and it had nothing to do with Palestinians. It had to do with the fact that I thought that to be a Zionist, you had to believe that all Jews need to live in the land of Israel. I didn't believe that then. I don't believe that now. I then read through Arthur Herzberg's Zionist idea. I began to understand that there are many forms of Zionism which I find repugnant and racist, and others with which I identify. So it really should mean, but the first question should be not just are you a Zionist or an anti-Zionist, but what do you mean? And what does that mean in terms of what you will do or not do in the name of Zionism? Yeah.
So I wonder, on the day of October 7th, I was I was part of this sort of I was in this group chat on Twitter, and it was mostly like Marxists or whatever, and it shocked me because they were celebrating the killing, and I was appalled, and I confronted
That
them.
drives me crazy. That drives me crazy when I see people lionizing Hamas as these brave freedom fighters or whatever. What they did was disgusting, barbaric, and wrong, even though it can be seen as opposing the occupation, which is legitimate to oppose.
Do you have any thoughts on Peter Beinart?
Uh, be a little bit more focused. I mean,
Well, I think he was a Zionist, and he now wants like a one state thing.
Yeah.
What do you
Oh.
think of that? Is that pie in the sky?
Well, first of all, as the director of a human rights organization, we say the occupation must end, but it's beyond our mandate to say what that will look like. One or a two or a 10-state solution or borders here or there. And also, as an individual, I think it is a huge mistake when people say this is the solution and all the other solutions won't work. What's much more important is the process, a process by which, in a non-coercive way, we get to some kind of agreement, an agreement that both the leaders on both sides are capable of marketing to their constituencies, because neither the Israelis nor the Palestinians did what they committed to doing under the Oslo Accords. And having said that, I basically think that the two-state solution is more or less dead. And for many years, I used to say that people who said that were being way too premature. And now I feel that just looking at the levels of infrastructure and everything else in the West Bank, it is, I won't say it's impossible, but it is increasingly impossible to see how that could actually come about. Maybe variations on the theme, but certainly not the classical idea of two states and the evacuation of all the settlements and what have you.
I'm curious, what do you think would happen if the EU and the US said any Israeli that lives in the West Bank can no longer get a visa to travel to America or Europe? Do you ever think about what effect that would have?
In some sectors, it would create a backlash, but it might make something sink in for others. I don't know.
Do you think these types of increasing sanctions are useful, or?
I think that sanctions of individual settlers, as nasty as they may be, is a symbolic thing that doesn't really change much of anything. Much more important are the sanctions of organizations like Amanah that are raising the money to pursue the settlement enterprise.
So I want to ask you a hard question, which is sort of the secular argument that for why a two-state solution won't work. And it's basically, it has to do with geography, right? So the West Bank has the high ground, right? Looking down on the main population area of Tel Aviv. So a lot of people said, imagine if October 7th had happened when there was a Palestinian state, and they had been able to invade, right by Tel Aviv as well as Gaza, and maybe Israel would have been lost. and that it's just too risky to give that high ground, where they could just fire on Ben Gurion Airport, so easily, that it's just not going to work. It's just too small land. What do you think of that?
Well, I understand those arguments. I would say, first of all, we've seen the Houthis and everybody else firing at us. It's already possible to fire on any part of Israel. And if we're really concerned about that, the question becomes what we're going to do to create a reality which maybe will not eliminate the theoretical possibility of rockets in that way being fired against us, but really reduces the possibility that would happen because we've reduced the level of animosity and hate. So it's really a question of what you ultimately really think can actually bring about peace and security, which we want and deserve. And I would argue that it's the concerns about rockets being fired from the West Bank at the airport are understandable. I won't say there's not anything behind them, but ultimately that's not what's puts us in most danger.
You recommended a documentary before.
All these parts.
The law, yeah. And have you seen The Gatekeepers, by the way?
I've never seen it.
Oh, it's so good.
And I'll tell you one of the reasons why it's hard for me to bring myself to go and watch it. If I had $1 for every person who has told me of what they should have done when they no longer were in the positions to implement or they had the power to do it, I'd be a very wealthy person. It's very difficult for me even to contemplate these former high security officials that maybe could have done something when and didn't do it when they had a chance, and now they're talking about, all of these things. It's just hard for me to think about going and watching that.
It's very good. We should do a show where you just react to it.
Yeah.
But do you have any other books or writers, other documentaries that you recommend to listeners?
I really would recommend Law in These Parts. You can go online and you can
Right.
rent it for a day or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it's simply, as I said, so different from any other documentary because it's not what the producer is getting up on his soapbox and saying what he thinks. It's really allowing people in their own words to say what they did and why. And you see some people were actually trying to do the right thing in an impossible situation, and the others who were just committed to, from the get-go, to screwing over the Palestinians and this kind of thing. And so I would recommend that.
Any journalists you recommend?
Well, of course, there's some very good journalists at Haaretz, Amir Ahas, now Hagar Shizaf, our Guido Levy, who are always worth reading, and Gershon Gorenberg. There are a number of other good people out there that are writing things worth reading.
I want to just get your take on the rising anti-Semitism in the diaspora. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's a worrying phenomena. I understand how it makes people all the more reticent to uh, speak out and feeling more and more that you have to draw in the wagon circles. Um, I think that whereas not all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic, as much as there are those who would try to label it that way. I do think that a situation like the current one gives cover for people who really are anti-Semitic to come out of the woodwork and what have you. The question becomes, what's the smart way of changing that reality? You know, and I think that ultimately acting justly is our best remedy for anti-Semitism.
So, to conclude, could you tell people about your organization and how they can support it?
So, I've been leading Israeli human rights organizations now for over 29 years, for 21 years, Rabbis for Human Rights, and which I left in 2016 and founded Torah Tzedek, the Torah of Justice, in 2017. We are a universal human rights organization. We don't only work for the human rights of Palestinians, we also work for the human rights of Jewish Israelis and non-Jewish Israelis who are, Negev Bedouin or whoever. In other words, and we really try to uh, exemplify what for me is the meaning of all human beings created in God's image. Unlike rabbis' human rights, not everybody in Torah Tzedek, it's only a small number of people to begin with, and they're not by any means all religious or what have you. I'm only a rabbi. But our work spans from our right center on behalf of Israelis in or in need of public housing, and then a coalition of groups that deal with the try to impact on policy on these things. Uh, we've one of the things that's so much depressing right now is so many things that we worked for so many years or worked for so many years are being swept away in East Jerusalem, where a community center we built in the El Bustan neighborhood is gone, and this community that we helped to work to try to preserve, and we thought we did so back in 2005, now seeming about to be wiped out, as is Haran in the Negev. But we have over the years worked on behalf of Negev Bedouin, Israeli citizens, issues in East Jerusalem. We're certainly most known for the work that we're doing on behalf of Palestinian farmers and shepherds. We're just concluding the olive harvest right now, and one of the great victories that I'm proud of over the years was the Marar High Court decision in 2006, regulating or delineating the obligation of Israeli security forces toward Palestinian farmers. Much of that isn't, it's still incredibly important and has an impact to getting people to lands they hadn't been able to get to for years. And it has been chipped away since 2006, which is why one of our projects is to try to find ways of legally and otherwise to restore the impact of that decision. But a huge percentage of what we're doing today is just like what I'm doing right now, protective presence, needing to be present in endangered communities so that people won't be alone, first and foremost.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, because I saw you talk recently, and after October 7th, basically the legal situation for you, you're going out there, has gotten a lot worse. So now you were arrested recently, and they just kept you in that usually they would, during the court process, they would let you out. And now recently they're keeping you in the jail for periods of time. So, yeah.
Basically, in all the 29 years that I've been over at Preston, I've been doing this, I've never felt marginalized. I always felt that there were significant amounts of Israelis with us, maybe even the majority sometimes, and now I do feel marginalized. And it's of course it's not about us when we are not the primary victim, it's the Palestinians. But the incident that you were referring to was that it was an olive harvest, and we were attacked, and the army did exactly what the Moore High Court decision from 2006 said they cannot do. They closed the area to everybody, supposedly for the good of the Palestinians, except for that means that you're punished for having been attacked. And then after having spoken to the legal advisor for the occupied territories, who said he would try to look into this, uh, although nothing came of that, you can, I'm recorded on video as saying, we, even though it's in a legal order, we're going to be good boys and girls. We're going to move out to the outside and wait to see if the legal advisor's office can do something about this. And I said, and remember, the police and army are not our enemies, but they see us, and maybe even me particularly, as their enemies. And so then they, after waiting around for about an hour outside the closed area, they arrested three of us for having taken too long to get out of the closed area. And generally, and I knew from the very get-go that the real reason for this was an excuse to give us 15-day bans from being in the entire West Bank, because what they really want is us not there. And so in the police station, I said, let's just cut to the chase. You know that you're in the end going to, I could have actually left the police station right away if I had agreed to their conditions, which were, among other things, a 15-day ban. And in the past, when unreasonable conditions for release were given, you would refuse to sign, spend a day in jail, and the next day they've got to bring you in front of a judge. And almost always those judges would cancel these unreasonable conditions for release, but no longer. A and B. So it's not that they actually incarcerated me. I mean, they did, but basically, I could have just had been interrogated by the police and gone home, had I been willing to agree to this ban. And so that's a more accurate way of describing what happened to me.
And so, so when you donate to Arik's organization, you're helping them pay for a lawyer that is, as you point out, very crucial right now with the increased difficulties that are being put against your work.
We have expense we can't cover. Yeah. We're spending, we don't have emergency aid for shepherds that can't feed their flocks and need help for food aid. And as you just said, the legal work that we're doing, both because there's no point in a Palestinian making a complaint to the police without legal accompaniment, because the police just close these cases right and left without investigating. And even if we succeed in curtailing settler violence, as if we don't start getting these communities home that were expelled or fled, what have we really done? And that's why we've got right now we have a high court case we're in the process of on behalf of Wadi Asik, arguably the most violently of all the expelled of all the communities that were expelled violently. And so yes, those are all things that we do.
And if you want to donate, I just want to spell the name of your organization. So it's TORAT.
First word.
Yeah, and then the second word is TZEDEK.
Correct.
Torah Tzedek. And in conclusion, I just want to say, and I say this as someone who believes in Israel. I think Israel is I think a world without Israel would be very dangerous for Jews everywhere in the world. And I believe that, people will say that Rabbi Ascherman is, they try to cast him as anti-Israel. But actually, I think the truth is exactly the opposite. I think you are helping Israel by fighting back against these, my words, not yours, but these messianic nut jobs who are doing stuff in the name of Israel that make Israel look bad. And people, if you support Israel, we can't ignore what's going on in the West Bank. We can't say, oh, that makes Israel look bad, it's fake. We have to acknowledge what's going on. And we have to not, people are using the behavior of this extreme fringe to demonize Israel every day. And if we support Israel, we have to stop that activity. That's just my 2 cents. Yeah.
I think you're right that that's just leading us down a very dangerous path. And again, what we do is because we think it's a just and right and Jewish thing to do. But it is self-interest. I don't know how many times over the years Palestinian parents have insisted that their children meet with us. And like deja vu, so many times the same conversation. My 10-year-old son has just seen that Israeli Jews did this and that and the other thing. And he wants to be a terrorist when he grows up. And we who don't want him to be a terrorist want him to understand that not all Jews come to demolish our homes and steal our land and uproot our trees and act violently and everything else. But there are those who stand shoulder to shoulder with us. And so it is self-interest. And it's also in these dark times when there is sadly a severe limit on what we can actually do. One of the things I so often say to Palestinians is, I can't make pie in the sky promises, given everything we're up against today, that what we're really going to be able to do for you. But I will promise one thing: you are not and will not be alone. And when I think, of course, just of all the times in our dark centuries for the Jewish people where we were alone, when the knock came on the door in the middle of the night, or the door was just busted down in the middle of the night, and how much we would have wanted people if just someone had been standing with us. And so I think that is something that is a commanding voice of Jewish history that we have to do. And ultimately, that also is our self-interest, because what do we think if we come to our senses one day and we're prepared to start really truly working for peace and human rights and everything else? I often ask, what percentage of the Palestinians who have seen their loved ones buried in the rubble, how many of them are going to be willing to speak with us?
Right. Israel tomorrow it could remove probably all the Palestinians, or bomb and just clear out all the Palestinians, maybe, okay? But in the process, because Israel is a small nation, it would lose the PR war. It would ultimately be self-destructive. The whole world would turn against it. Israel is a tiny country. If Turkey shuts off the oil from Azerbaijan, it could be blockaded. So ultimately, there's this delusional thinking, I think, on the Israeli far right, and it could very well destroy the entire state, I fear.
I think you're right. Netanyahu even has some understanding that you can't just all the time diss the entire international community, but people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir do have these messianic beliefs that we can stand against the world and come out okay.
So you've had a long day, but I just want to thank you so much, Rabbi. I think your work is heroic.
Well, thank you. And ultimately, the only way, as we are descending into darkness right now, we're ever going to get to the light is if we all work together for the world and in Israel living up to the values that we believe in. We have to do it together. And so thank you for taking the time to hear me out on some of these things, and that together we really can make a difference.